Ramon. I'm the Outreach Manager for NOVA, and thank you for joining us on this absolutely beautiful spring day. For those of you that are new to our channel, welcome, and grab a trail snack, maybe some hiking shoes, because we're taking a virtual field trip, and I hope you're ready. So this is an opportunity to connect with scientists across the country to learn about some of the incredible work that's being done across all areas of science, technology, engineering, and math. And if you have any questions at any time during our presentation, you can drop them in the comment section on either our Facebook or YouTube stream, wherever you're watching, and we'll try to get to as many as possible during our time together. So today, we get to learn about one of Earth's most majestic creatures, bald eagles. And while many of us love to grab a pair of binoculars and, trek through the woods and maybe spot a woodpecker or a waterfowl here or there, there's just something really special about spotting a bald eagle soaring through a bright blue sky, maybe one like you have today. And I know our guest today will certainly agree with me.
Absolutely.
So today's virtual field trip, we have Amy Ries from the Raptor Resource Project joining us. She helped establish the burgeoning field of camera-based wildlife study with the world-famous Decorah Eagle Cam that went viral in 2011. She began working with birds of prey in 1994 when the Raptor Resource Project founder Bob Anderson answered an ad she was running in a local newspaper. And since that time, she's written grants, learned to rappel, become a bird bander, developed and managed social media accounts, installed camera systems in trees, which you'll get an intimate look at today, and helped trap hawks and learn the fundamentals of full stack web development. Amy, you are a one-woman machine. So when she's not working, Amy can be found hanging out with her family, climbing, walking in the woods, or lecturing everyone within earshot about birds. And today, we're going to hear her talk about some birds. So without further ado, Amy, I'll pass it off to you so you can tell us about these incredible creatures. So whenever you're ready, feel free to share your screen.
All right, can you see me?
I can see you, but I can't see your screen yet.
Okay, let's go ahead and make sure that gets done correctly. Aha. There we go.
There we go. Beautiful.
Okay, so thank you for joining us for Thinking on the Fly, Lessons Learned in a Bald Eagle's Nest. Before we get going, I'd like to talk a little bit about my organization, the Raptor Resource Project. We were founded by falconer Bob Anderson in 1989 to breed highly endangered peregrine falcons for release. Turns out Bob was pretty good at breeding peregrine falcons. He bred the first captive peregrine falcons in Minnesota and produced the first falcon to return to the wild and reproduce mid-continent. That was MF1, who was produced for the Minnesota Falconers Association. She nested at the City Center building in downtown Minneapolis in 1987. He installed our first Eagle Cam in 2003 at Xcel Energy's Fort St. Vrain plant in Platteville, Colorado. That was not a live cam like we have now. It just uploaded pictures of eagles to the internet. We began the live stream from the Decorah Eagle's Nest in 2011. We're currently directed by John Howe, who has greatly expanded and improved our camera education programs. And you can see our mission statement at the bottom. We're dedicated to preserving and strengthening raptor populations, expanding participation in conservation, and educating people around the world about raptors and their habitats. And our cameras are a really important part of that work. So I'm going to skip the next slide, which is just about me, other than to point out that this is what we look like when we're working on cliffs. I'm in a full climbing rig here, gree-gree, rope bag, and you can see there's a falcon right there behind me on the screen. I don't really have a title, but if I did, it would probably be Jack of almost all trades. There's really no job too big or too small not to get involved in. So before we talk about the eagles, we're going to talk about their nests. There have been 4 nests that we know of on this property. The first nest, the bluff nest down on the bottom there, no longer exists, but that was built by Dad and original mate, OM, in, we think, about 2002. OM disappeared in 2007. We don't really know why, and Dad joined up with Mom, the current female. Together, they built N1 up over here on the left. We don't know why, again, in 2012, they just decided, hey, we're done with this nest, but they started building a new nest over across the street. That's N2, which you can see no longer exists. In 2015, after a really big storm in July, the tree just cracked right in half and it fell over. Fortunately, it was July, so none of the eaglets were hurt, but we were kind of faced with a dilemma. Like, we've been watching this eagles, we're doing this study, what do we do? So shortly before Bob passed away, he greenlighted a project to build a new nest. You can see N2B over here right near N2. That was the nest that we built in 2015 for the eagles. It was in August. Bob unfortunately never got to see its completion, but the eagles adopted it in October of 2015, so sort of fulfilling our dream. We're also going to talk a little bit about the territory here. So you can see this is the Decorah fish hatchery. This here are the fish ponds. Sometimes the eagles will hunt in these raceways, but they really tend to prefer the retention pond right here. There's a nice population of feral fish in there, feral trout more or less, and the fish hatchery also sometimes dumps dead trout there, so it's an excellent source of food. You can kind of see a stream here that runs past N1, N2, and N2B. That stream in April and May is filled with spawning white suckers, so they come up on gravel bars, they're spawning, they're preoccupied. All the eagles have to do to catch them is basically fly down about 70 feet, swoop up as many as they want, and come back to the nest. So this territory has an absolutely excellent source of food. It's also protected in a valley, although you can't really see it here. This is a big cliff, and there's hills behind here, and it rises also over here. So they really are protected despite the tree falling usually from the worst of the weather. And we think that between the food and the protected location, it's one of the reasons that this territory has so successfully produced eagles year after year after year. We're also going to learn a little bit about the eagles. So again, there's been 4 eagles on this property. I don't have a picture of OM for everybody. She was blind in one eye and was featured in the movie American Bald Eagle. So she and Dad built this nest in 2002. The fall of 2007, Mom takes over. Mom and Dad nest in N1, N2, and N2B. Dad disappears after an April snowstorm in 2018, leaving Mom to raise 2 or 3 young eagles. I don't remember that year, all by herself. She did an absolutely excellent job. In the fall of 2018, DM2 showed up and she took up with him. So how do we know who is who? In general, female bald eagles are larger than male bald eagles, but we don't always get to see them side by side in the nest, so we have to look at other things about them. So females have deeper brows. You can see Mom has this nice deep brow, gray eyeshadow, kind of smoky eye thing going on, and darker heads overall. If you look at her head, you'll see she has these fine black, either vein or bristle feathers. So that helps us determine hers or see who's in the nest even when they're not side by side. The male eagles are smaller, but you can see they also have a lot wider heads and they have a lot shallower brows, and you can more clearly see the black ring around their eyes, which we refer to as guy liner. So that's how we tell male from female eagles even when they're not standing next together. Our cameras are also good enough to pick out details that identify individual eagles. So if you look here at male eagle 2, DM2, you can see, like, you might be able to see there's some flecks in his eyes. So we can pick out these individual things that are unique to eagles. Iris flecks as unique as thumbprints, molt patterns, scale patterns, and unique persistent feather coloration. So, for example, one of the old eagles at our North nest, Mrs. North, had unique white slashed pantaloons, right? The current female has a dark fleck above her eye. So we can not only recognize male from female eagles, we can tell the difference between individual eagles. We also get asked why we have so many nests and eagles on the same territory, besides the fact that it's awesome. We think of eagles as monogamous, but they really practice mate succession, right? So if one half of a pair disappears or dies, the other half of a pair will sooner or later accept a new mate. If it's fall, when all the hormones are flowing, it's probably going to happen quicker. If it's spring, they have babies, they have a whole different hormonal regimen, probably going to happen later, but it's still going to happen. So this means that because you have kind of this mate succession going, eagles will stay anchored to a territory even as mates change. We used to think that eagles paired off as soon as they reach sexual maturity, but research and our cameras have shown us that they really don't. We've also learned that eagles can be picky about their mates, right? So it's Mom went through 2 other eagles. And again, we know this because we're able to see the details and kind of went, nah, not you guys, before DM showed up and she took up with him. Now we're going to talk about the lesson. And lesson number 1 of Lessons from an Eagle's Nest is adaptability. So eagles at this latitude lay eggs in February and March, which means that they are dealing with snow, ice, and really cold temperatures, right? So they handle snowfall by digging, scraping, which is churning with their legs, and rolling their breasts to flatten the snow. Once the snow is ready, they cover it with layers of nesting material, which they mold and press to their body. And we also see them spend a lot of time digging in the substrate. That loosens the frozen material and creates a depression that drains water away. And it's large enough that we can actually feel it when we come into the nest several months later. It's noticeably lower and looser than everything else. So let's talk a little bit about what's going on here on the screen. Female eagles incubate more than males, but males usually do more work, and we're seeing that in the center panel on the nest bowl and egg cup. And we think that's because they're a little smaller. They probably couldn't work with mom's larger size, but a nest cup that he sizes will work well for both of them. So we had a huge snowstorm on January 23rd. And you can see here, January 24th, the eagles have already been working on the nest. They've been rolling and scraping and digging, and they've created a depression. By January 25th, they're bringing materials into the nest. And here's kind of a lesson in adaptability. So you can see, I think this is DNF at the north nest. She's got corn stalks all around the nest. It's Iowa, there's snow on the ground, but corn stalk stubble is sticking out through the snow, and they can get it easily. It's also an excellent insulator. So eagles at both of our Iowa nests really, really like corn stalks and husks, and they bring in a lot. But eagles at our Colorado nest don't have that option, right? So they bring in a lot of grasses and reeds, which again stick up above the snow. So eagles really adapt to their territories. They use the things they have at hand. They learn where prey is. They learn where perches are. They learn where resources are. And they'll even adapt their territories a little bit, perhaps, for example, removing sticks from favorite sight lines so that they can continue using the things they want. They're really, to me, stunningly adaptable. And then by January 29th, so this is 4 days later, you can see that the eagles have completely carpeted the floor of their nest bowl. We've got layers of grass in there. We've got layers of husks in there. And this is DNF, the female. She's kind of built up a berm that you can see sort of around her body. And that's another thing that we see them do. So to respond to cold or warm or humidity, they might pull materials in. They might loosen materials. They might shift around a little bit. They adapt to the circumstances. And it's really important that they do that, because if they didn't do that, they wouldn't be able to successfully lay eggs in Iowa, in Minnesota, in the middle of the winter. Lesson number 2, tenacity. So here's 3 portraits, 2 of incubation and 1 of brooding. That would be at the top left. Our eagles have laid eggs in temperatures as cold as 50 degrees below zero. After the eggs are laid, the eagles incubate them almost continuously for 35 to 39 days through snow and rain and dark of night, right? So eagles have a body temperature of about 105 degrees Fahrenheit, and eggs are best incubated at around 99 degrees Fahrenheit, which means that the eagles have heat to spare. They also have a brood patch, which is a highly vascularized area of bare skin on their chest that transfers heat from their bodies to their eggs. Those beautiful brown feathers cover the eggs above. The layered material we talked about in the last slide cups them from below, and that creates a space that keeps the eggs warm, dry, and cozy, even in sub-zero temperatures. It's not uncommon, though, for watchers to worry when the eagles get off their eggs, right? It's middle of winter, it's 2 degrees below zero, and suddenly the eagles are hopping off their eggs. So what's going on? Eggs can get too warm. Think about that spare 6 degrees of temperature. So the eagles will get up to let them cool down. They'll also let them dry out. And of course, the eggs require rolling. Rolling helps keep the embryos from sticking to the eggs, and also helps the egg develop important membranes that support the embryos as they grow. Climate change. We get asked about that, and I do think we're seeing a couple signs of it in our nest. So if you look down here at the lower right, you can see speckles of rain on DM2's back. It is either late February or early March, and it's raining in Iowa. Rain does sometimes fall in March, but we're still seeing that a lot more now. And I'll be interested to see how the eagles cope with that, because eagles can cope with snow and cold extremely well. But a cold February rain is really pretty challenging. We're also seeing kind of a shift in what we thought we knew about them. So it was believed that eagles began incubation immediately. And what happens is, mom will lay an egg. Laying an egg is really hard work. So she gets the egg laid, and she usually just collapses into an exhausted sleep, slumbers for a while, and incubation starts. But in warmer temperatures, we're seeing them spend time off the first couple of eggs. Not a lot, but a little bit. And what's going on is getting off the eggs and letting them cool down can slow embryonic development, which suspends really well in the first part of development. So that means that all of the eggs, which usually are laid 2 to 3 days apart, will be closer together in development and will hatch closer together, which makes it easier for the parents to take care of their young. This year in Decorah, we had the first 2 eggs hatch 9 hours apart, which we've never seen before. The closest we've ever seen them hatch is, let me think about this, right around 24 hours. And it's actually been kind of interesting telling D34 and D35 apart as they've grown. It's not usually as much of a challenge as it has been this year. Lesson number 3 is to keep trying. So I'm going to talk a little bit about hatch here. And if you look at the screen, you'll see we've got an adorable eaglet. It's probably, its eyes are still bulging, right? They're not settled into their sockets. You can see the little egg tooth right there. So this is maybe a day old. It's still got the adorable white fluffy natal down. Then we've got an unhatched egg. And then we've got an eaglet that's right at the end of hatching. It's not quite out of the shell yet, and you can see that it's still wet with body fluids. So hatch can take as long as 3 days to complete. In fact, I think a nest in Florida this year went 3.5 days, and it's a real process. It starts like this. The chick positions its head at the large end of the egg. So if you look at an egg, it's got a blunt end. I should have brought a chicken egg in. It's got a blunt end and a sharp end. So it rolls, so its head is at the blunt end. If you ever peeled a hard-boiled egg, there's an airspace in there. It pokes its beak up into that airspace and starts breathing air with its lungs for the first time. While it's doing that, it's also taking the yolk and albumin that remains into the egg into its body cavity. At one point, I thought it did it through its mouth, but its mouth is up here, right? Breathing. So its body cavity is still open. It sucks it all in, and then its body cavity seals around it, which forms the egg yolk sac scar, or as we call it, the eaglet belly button. So the eagle now has enough, even if it takes a few days, it really has enough energy to hatch. So as it grows, it's still growing while all this is going on. There's a hatching muscle that contracts and snaps its head back. That brings that adorable little egg tooth into contact with the eggshell. So it'll create a hole, and then it will cut through it, rotating as it goes. As the egg gets looser and looser, it uses its strength to push the eggshell halves apart, although sometimes you'll see, especially if it has siblings in the nest or adults in the nest, you'll see an adult brush against it or a sibling sort of bang up against it, and the egg will separate and the young eaglet will fall out. The eaglet has landed and hatch is complete. So let's talk about eaglet life. You can roughly divide it into 2 pieces, weeks 1 to 4, and then weeks 5 and 11 through 12. In weeks 1 to 4, we see a lot of what I think of as baby behaviors, right? They eat, they sleep, they bonk, they poop, and they do it all over again. So in the first week, which is shown in the left slide, they quintuple their weight from about 3.2 ounces to 1 pound. And again, it's a lot of eating, sleeping, bonking, pooping, and repeating. And the bonking really accelerates through the first week. And what's going on is the eaglets are establishing a pecking order, right? Everybody's familiar with that term. So usually the oldest eaglet is at the top of it. It's a larger eaglet, and it will peck at and cause its younger siblings to submit so it gets to the food first. There certainly could be an element of survival of the fittest to this that gets talked about a lot, but I also believe that the eagles are setting themselves up for future eagle behavior, because adult eagles also need to be able to know when to hand over food, say dad brings a fish to mom, and when to take food even when another eagle doesn't want to hand it over. We don't think about eagle society because when we watch them, they're paired off in a tree. But outside of their territories, eagles are really, really social. And this kind of pecking order or hierarchy is an important part of how they hang around together. So in week 2, they triple their weight from about 1 to about 3 pounds, and they start exploring the nest, and that's super cute. So they don't stand on their feet yet. They sit on their tarsi, which you can actually see over in the week 4 slide, right? So they're shuffling around the nest like this. They can't get very far usually, but especially if it's warm, you'll see them start to explore and learn about the boundaries of their world. In week 3, they go from 3 to about 5.5 pounds, which is crazy, but also, they're no longer quintupling or tripling their weight. So it is starting to slow a little bit. They begin moving objects. They fiddle with things with their beaks. We call it playing house, and bonking subsides. If you look at this picture over in at week 3, that's at the end of week 3, those are some pretty big eaglets, and those bonks can really, really hurt. So we tend to see that behavior drop off once a pecking order is established, which happens very early, and then once the eagles get big enough for those blows to be like, ouch, that hurts. And then in week 4, feather growth starts to overtake weight gain. So we see activities like pellet casting, and they also start attempting self-feeding. If you look over here in week 1, you can see, I think this is mom, handing a tiny little bite to one of her eaglets. They're not real coordinated yet. They can't see real well yet. So the bites tend to be really small and all digestible. They're 100% wheat meat. By week 4, you can see we have this giant eaglet. It's lunging for food. It's grabbing at food. It might be pecking at trout in the bottom of the nest, and it's getting a lot more indigestible materials like scale, bone, and fur. Since eaglets can't digest them and they can't go through an eagle's digestive system, they compress them into pellets and then cough them up through their mouth. So that's something, like I said, we commonly see in the 4th week. And then they begin to try to get into trout, but they're not standing on their feet yet, so they're not very good at it. Another thing we see in this first 4 weeks is feather succession. If you look here at week 1, you see this nice, like fluffy, cute natal down. That is replaced by thermal down. You can see these eagles are grayer, which helps them thermoregulate. You can also see here, they're just losing their natal down right there. We call it the mohawk or peruke wig stage. And here, you can almost see the tips of the pin feathers coming in right there, which is, again, feather growth is a big point in eagle life, and they have among the fastest growth rates of any North American bird. So in the second part, not really half of eagle life, you see all these big kid behaviors come into play. And, excuse me, people don't tend to tune into them quite as much, but I absolutely love, they're not as cute, especially when they're tweenagers or tween eagles, but they're getting all of these interesting behaviors. So once they can stand on their feet, they go from, little baby winger sizing to huge giant flaps, and they begin trampolining. They're bouncing around the nest. They're not really flying yet, but they're learning that their wings can support them. They also begin self-feeding. So instead of stealing bites from mom and dad or having food stuffed into their beak, they'll begin unzipping their own fish and feeding themselves. They gain balance and coordination by perching on sticks. They start attacking prey items and other items in the nest, which is really very funny to watch. And they hone their eagle table manners by stealing, mantling, and defending prey. So you'll see one eaglet grab a fish from another eaglet, mantle over it, eat it. A third eagle coming for the steal. And they do that without bonking, but it's very funny to watch. And then the gray thermal down, which you can still see in the eaglet at left, is completely replaced by juvenile feathers as the eaglets move toward fledging, or their first powered flight away from the nest. We often get asked whether the eagles are boys or girls, so we make guesses. Females start pulling ahead of males in size at about 38 to 40 days of age, but we can't issue an official determination without measuring them or sending material into a nest for genetic testing. And that's because camera angles can be really, really confusing, right? So you say like, hey, that's a big giant eagle and that one's small, but you also have camera eagles in play, and eagles can be closer or further away from the camera. And you can have a clutch where all the eagles are the same sex. I've never sexed eagles that way, but I have sexed peregrines, and I can tell you it's very, very confusing because your mind is completely convinced there must be males and females in this clutch, so you kind of come up with facts to support that, even though there's not. So we love to guess, and we have fun guessing, but we don't actually have an official determination of sex unless we capture them and measure them. Like hatch, fledge is a process. So, and I saw this morning, it was super fun to watch on the nest. They were trampolining. They start with that, so their wing or size it, and they start bouncing up and down. It's super fun to watch. It builds strength and coordination. Pretty soon we'll start to see hovering. So hovering is a little bit more than trampolining. The eagles have learned through trampolining that they can bounce. With hovering, they really learn that their wings will hold them in the air. And that's kind of an indeterminate step between trampolining and branching, the next phase. So branching teaches eagles the fundamentals of flight. They hop flap up maybe at the skywalk or one of the other branches. They make really short glides back down into the nest, and they scramble from branch to branch as they learn things like, hey, how do I use these wings and tail to land? How do I use them to get places? This is a very early way that they explore the nest, their wings, and their flight. And finally, they take the big step of fledging, their first powered flight away from the nest. They usually fly to another tree, but sometimes they end up on the ground. And this is kind of a hard period for all of us, and it gets into another lesson. Again, trust the eagles, right? Eagles have been doing this for a long time, and it works for them. But it can be upsetting to somebody who's watched the eagles literally for months, since they spent 75 to 80 days in the nest, suddenly have this eaglet disappear. We can't see it. We don't know where it is. However, eagles, if they end up on the ground, will commonly climb up into a tree or some low underbrush. The parents continue to care for them as they fledge, so they're not all on their own. And normally what will happen is sometimes the same day, but sometimes it takes a couple days, we'll find the eagles up in a tree or back in the nest. If fledge has gone wrong, so for example, if the eagles abandon the nest before they can fly, as they did last year, then we need to go find them and make sure that they weren't injured. Or if we don't see them for longer than we think we should, we will look for them with cameras and also send observers out, not to, beat the underbrush, because we do want to leave them space and we don't want to accidentally injure them trying to help them, right? Especially if nothing's wrong. But we do have people on the lookout for them in Decorah who can help us find out what's going on. So what happens after fledge? We have learned through transmitter studies with Brett Mandernack of Eagle Valley that the eaglets tend to disperse or leave about 85 days after they fledge for the first time, so about September 10th. In the first part of fledging, we'll see the parents helping the eagles quite a bit. You might see a mom or a dad flying with a fish. The eaglets chase it. The first eaglet to catch the parent gets the prize, right? The fish. We might see the eaglets following mom and dad around as they hunt. We might see parents feeding eaglets. But as the eagles get better and better, they begin to fish for themselves. They begin to hunt for themselves, because hunting and flying are instinctual, right? But being good at them is learned. We'll see the parents kind of pull back a little bit. So instead of giving a squeeing, begging eagle a fish, they might just be like, nah, we're out of here. You can take care of this yourself. We also start to see the eagles expanding their flights. So we've tracked 7 eagles from Decorah, and as they learn to fly, we'll see them sort of fly maybe a mile, come back, maybe 2 miles, come back, and they'll begin to hone their navigation skills, and again, also their flying skills. So of the 7 eagles we've tracked, 4 died. 3 died of electrocution. That was Indy, who died just a couple days after fledge, and D14 and 4, who died a few months after fledge. And then 1 died following a collision. That was D24's sibling, D25. So both of these are fairly common ways for eagles to die, with, I believe, collision being more common. In the case of electrocution, an eagle will make a contact between the powered side of an electrical circuit, usually a power line, maybe a transformer or a pole, and ground. Electricity will flow through its body and kill it. When we've reported these to power companies, they've been really very, very good about fixing the poles or protecting the poles. They don't like to kill eagles either. Also, when an eagle basically shorts out a circuit, it can create all kinds of damage and fire. So it tends to get treated fairly seriously. If you find a dead eagle in your area that you suspect was electrocuted, call your power company and report it, because they can come out and fix it, and they're usually quite happy to do that. In the case of a collision, so D25, right, young subadult eagle, maybe not as good at hunting yet as an adult eagle, sees a big piece of roadkill on the road. It's not going to run away. It's not going to bite you. It's really easy to eat. So it flies down to eat whatever it is that's dead on the road. A A car comes over a hill. Maybe D25 doesn't know the car is a threat. Maybe D25 doesn't recognize how fast it has to fly away. Either way, the car hits it and it dies. So, we encourage people to be aware if they're in an area where they're seeing a lot of eagles that could be a risk. If it's safe, and I'm going to stress if it's safe, you can also remove the carry-on from the road if you have a shovel, or you can call your state Department of Transportation or whatever it's called in your state, right? And let them know something's there. Now, 2 eagles are still known to be alive, D27, and this is D27's map, and D24, who we hear from sometime. I think we last heard from him last fall. And then one may still be alive. That was D1, an eaglet from 2011, known as E2 at the time. We lost contact with her in 2014, but we don't have any reason to think that she's dead. So if you look at our eagles, and this is a little side-by-side comparison, of the 3 that survived, this is D1 in 2011. She went all the way up to Polar Bear Park for the summer. This is on the shore of Hudson's Bay, and it's over 900 miles from her natal nest. You could just see D24 up here near International Falls. He's about 348 miles northwest of his natal nest. We don't know if he actually went further than that because, again, we don't hear from him a whole lot. And then this is D27 over here in northwest Ontario. She's about 750 miles northwest of her natal nest. Now this screen here, I'm just going to show you how far some eagles can travel. So Sarah Schmucker of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has tracked eagles from Rock Island, Illinois, which is, I think, probably right about here, to the northern shores of Nunavut, which is way up at the top of Canada there. Those eagles are traveling a distance over 1,800 miles every year. Now, she's capturing her eagles in the winter, which means they probably come down from Canada to spend the winter along the Mississippi River, and they're going up north, excuse me, either to hang out with other eagles back, back to their natal territories or their summer territories, or in the case of adults, they're breeding. All right, let's talk a little bit about one of my favorite parts, getting to the nest or the tree or the eyrie. So here's what's going on in these pictures. This over here on the left is Kike Arnall. He is our lead climber. He's a photographer, a videographer, and a researcher. He's really quite incredible. This is John Howe. John is climbing up a tree. He's going to be installing a camera. And this is me in the blue helmet and my colleague Dave Kester in the white helmet. We're installing a nest box on a cliff in Wyalusing, Wisconsin to improve peregrine habitat. And as you might guess, all of this takes a lot of planning and hard work. And so much gear. Oh my God. So this is my kitchen table, and this is not all of our gear. And you can see it completely takes up the table. On this table, I have about 100 carabiners. Oh gosh, we have pulleys, we have hand ascenders, we have chest ascenders, we have gree-grees, we have more pulleys, we have leashes. That's not nearly all of our leashes. Chest harnesses, waist harnesses, helmets, material to make more leashes, cord, personal anchor systems. So all of this is required to get into a tree and do work. And you really, really have to understand how to use it. Because if you don't understand how to use it properly, the chances of hurting or killing yourself or somebody else is really quite high. We also really carefully time when we go up to the nest, right? So the nest is not really like a house. We think of it that way, but what it really is a nursery. And parents don't tend to spend a whole lot of time in the nursery after the babies are gone. So in September, the eagles are at their point of loosest attachment to the nest, and that's when we do our work at all of our nests. So they'll sometimes, maybe fly by in the distance, maybe give us a look like, what are you guys doing to our nest? But they don't bother us, and we don't really bother them. And we always leave them a little treat of a frozen squirrel or a fish when we leave. It also requires so much equipment. So in this picture, you can see Kike is loading buckets over on the left. John is working on electrical gear on the right, and we've got Dave Kester climbing a tree, installing a camera, and doing some stuff with a saw. That particular installation also required ladders and chainsaws. So when we go up into a tree, we first of all get up the tree ourselves, and then we have to bring everything with us. It requires cameras, microphones, bolts, screws, tape, more tape, all different kinds of tape, lumber, silicone gel, and so on and so forth. And these nests tend to be, although we think of them as large, they're like maybe bathtubs or upside down VWs and trees, right? They are really quite large. Still, when you get two people out there working, it doesn't seem like very much space. So we really have to think carefully about what we're going to bring up there. We also have to think about the resources we have at hand. So, what do I think I'm going to need? If I don't have something up there, what do I have to do? Is there a hardware store 2 miles away, or is the nearest hardware store, 100 miles away? So it's really very important to consider this stuff and really think through all the steps of what you're taking up, what you're trying to accomplish, and how you're going to leave when you're planning your equipment needs. And finally, you get ascending to the nest. So the first step to ascending to the nest is, what we tend to think about is, yay, climbing, but you have to do a lot of pre-thinking even for that. So, hey, am I going up on a live branch, or is that branch dead? Is there a car across the side of the road? So when I shoot the first line, well, it comes down and takes out the car's windshields. Where are we going to put the cameras? Where are we going to try to access? What other cameras are up there? We don't want to shoot a line and destroy an existing camera, right? So you really have to think through all of this stuff before you get to sort of the final step, ascending to the nest. So here I'm ascending, and we're actually doing something a little bit different here. We're practicing getting into the nest in case there were an emergency and we couldn't shoot a line from the bottom. So in this case, I'm using a hand ascender and a gree-gree, which you can't really see right now, because that gives me the best combination of sort of getting up into the nest and flexibility. We also use a chest harness with a chest ascender and hand ascenders, but those, they get you up faster. They're easier to use in the sense of physical motion. This is more draining, but I wanted to use it in this case because I really needed to have room to move around and be flexible in how I was going to approach the nest. Once you're up in the nest, you have to build the set. So, again, what we tend to think about and talk about and be like, yeah, we did this, is climbing. But if you're going to spend 3 weeks in a tree, hardly any of it's going to be spent climbing. Almost all of it's going to be spent working in the nest. And to do that, you have to build your set. So this is N2B in Decorah. And if you look here, you can actually see some of the cross beams that support the nest. This is one of the nests we built. And then you can see these ropes. So we've got ropes up for hauling material, ropes up for accessing the nest. We've got a rope walking system here. This is actually all the same tree, but it's got a big fork in it. So we've got a camera over on this side of the tree, and we access it through this particular piece of lumber. You can kind of see it out the bottom there. It's actually quite a bit higher than it looks here. So again, you really have to think about what you're going to be bringing up, because you really don't have very much space. And you also have to think about how you're going to get other things. How are you going to get the camera up? How are you going to get the cables tied in? How are you going to set this up so it really works for everyone and is very safe? So, kind of one of the things I've learned in my years of doing this, when I started doing it, we were using analog cameras. The installation took about a day, and honestly, we weren't very safe. It was like, yeah, go up a rope, don't tie on anything, put the camera on. We were safe for the eagles, right? But we weren't very safe for ourselves. So one of the things we've learned as we've set up more and more advanced camera systems and been able to do more and more with them in terms of research is that we really have to plan these things meticulously and plan to spend a whole lot of time in a tree. In this picture at left, Kike is securing the end of the lumber system that you can see down here. And then this is just a kind of a look at how we tie things onto the tree. You remember I said earlier we use a lot of leashes and carabiners, and here's why. When you're up in a tree and you're working on a camera system, or really you're doing anything, you're always tying things onto other things, and you need a surprising amount of carabiners and leashes. And finally, we get to installing equipment. And there's really, really a lot to think about when you're doing this. So how do you set your cameras up so it's safe for your subjects, right? We can't have eagles coming up and smashing into cameras, but we still have the best camera angles and our viewers aren't, just looking at other cameras. That's a matter of aesthetics, but honestly, aesthetics are important. What kind of weather are we going to have to deal with? We obviously in Iowa deal with cold and snow, so our cameras need to be weatherproof. They need to be weather tight. they need to be able to operate at temperatures of -50 degrees or at temperatures of 100 degrees. So John does the camera picking out, and he really thinks quite a bit about how all of this is going to work so the cameras stay functioning. Because when we leave the nest at the end of September, we're not coming back till next September. And if something breaks, that's just, you know, too bad, so sad, right? Poop shoots, if you watch the cameras, you know that the eagles really let it fly, especially after they start standing on their feet. So we need to be able to set the cameras up so they're not constantly being splatted by poop, because when that happens, really all we can do is wait until it rains. Even with the cameras that have wipers, we need some moisture to be able to get that poop off there. So that's another thing to consider. Prey remains. Are the eagles going to bring in fish and drape them all over the cameras? The inevitable situation where you don't have some piece of equipment you need, like, oh man, I don't have this thing. Can I do without this thing? Can I come up with something else that will work? Do I have to get out of the tree and go get this thing, which will slow down the work? So that's something we have to think about a lot. Something breaks. And that's usually, this was working yesterday. So, hey, we tested it at home. It worked. We tested it at the bottom of the tree. It worked. Now we're up in the tree and it doesn't work. What do we do? How do we troubleshoot it? Where's the problem? You know, how do we make it work? Because again, we have until the end of September, and if it's not working, too bad. We also have to coordinate locations at activities at multiple locations. So we have this year our Decorah and Decorah nest, a Decorah North nest, and we had both going at once. So it's a matter of what are we going to do here today? What are we going to do here today? How are these sites different? How are the trees different? How is the equipment different? So all of that really has to get thought of. And then you have to think about weather. So in 2018, Kike and I were building the Decorah North nest together. He went up, he got the framework up, I came up, we were hauling up sticks and placing them, and suddenly the wind started blowing. It was really bad. We were going all over the place. And Kike is a world-class climber. He's climbed El Capitan. He's had first ascents down in South America. I mean, he's really quite incredible. But he kind of went like this, and I looked at him and I was like, oh no, Kike looks worried. And he's like, we're getting out of here now. So you really also have to be aware of the weather. Rain, you can work around it. It's slippery and gross and uncomfortable, but you can work around it. Lightning and wind, yeah, you can't work around those things. And finally, do not fall out of the tree, because yeah, our highest nest is, I think, 72 feet high. Our lowest is, I want to say 54. You're probably not going to survive that, honestly. And you have to leave no trace behind. So, hey, I've been up in a nest for 3 weeks and now I suddenly have to pick up everything. And I mean everything. You know, do we have all the little butt ends of tape? We try to pick it up as we go, but did we leave any in the nest? Do we have all the screws? Do we have all the cable ties? Do we have the cable tie ends? So you really have to think through, when you're setting up, also how you're going to get down and leave no trace behind. Because as much as we love watching the eagles, as much as we've learned from the eagles, really our number one concern is that we don't damage or frighten or harm the eagles with the research that we do. So all of this has to be factored in and sort of thought through on the fly, right? Because you're constantly adapting, you're constantly remaining tenacious through a problem, and you're constantly keeping things moving forward so that you can get this work complete. Which, of course, leads me to the recap, the lessons learned in a bald eagle's nest. We've learned adaptability. We've learned tenacity. We've learned to keep on trying. We've learned to trust the eagles, and that's a hard lesson, because as human beings, we tend to assume that, you know, we know we're smart, we know best, right? But the truth is, eagles may not be intelligent like us, but they have intelligence. Eagles may not learn like us, but they learn. And eagles have, in my opinion of watching them, an inner consciousness and an inner life. And we really need to trust that as they've evolved as a species over the long, long years, they've learned what's best for them, and they can handle most kinds of challenges that eagles handle in their daily life. I also think, really importantly to me, is that I've learned that we can make a difference for good. So when I started with the Raptor Resource Project, peregrine falcons were still highly endangered. Bob Anderson and a lot of other people were involved in breeding and returning them. We did that. The peregrine falcon was federally delisted in 1999. In, I believe it was 1972, DDT was outlawed for use in the United States. It's still used in a lot of places, but it wasn't used here where a lot of our eagles were breeding. We saw the population absolutely rebound in the absence of persecution, which did happen, and again in the absence of DDT, which caused eggshell thinning so that eggs would break during incubation. We made that difference, right? And I think we make a difference with what we're doing here. And I know from talking to you guys that you guys make a difference in your own life. Maybe you're picking up trash. Maybe you're creating a beautiful backyard habitat that's free of harmful pesticides for birds and insects. Maybe you're working with injured raptors. Maybe you're working with another species. But you're out there, you're making a difference. I'm making a difference. You guys at PBS Nova are making a difference. It's not insolvable. We can do it. We can make a difference for good. And in conclusion, thanks to PBS Nova for sharing our eagles. We'd also like to recognize our partner, Explore.org, our camera operators, and it's not up here, but our video makers. You guys find and share the best moments. Our chat and Facebook moderators for making our website and Facebook page the very best. Our board of directors, RMP founder Bob Anderson. I think he'd be really proud of what we've done, and I know he would be thrilled to be on PBS Nova today. And you. Thank you for watching, for sharing, for learning, and especially for caring. And eagle on, everybody. This was super fun. And that is the conclusion.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy. So we have some questions from our audience that I'm going to ask you.
Okay, do I stop sharing my screen at this point?
Yeah, that's a good idea. Great. So our first question is from Tina Ezzo, and she thinks that it seems like a great habitat for eagles, so where you've set up the nests. And she would like to know, how territorial are they? And would the eaglets be able to return to the same territory to nest, or will the parents keep that territory as their own?
Eagles are quite territorial on their territories. So when they're off their territories, they tend to be really social. You can see convocations of hundreds of birds in the winter on the Mississippi River. But on their territories, they're very territorial. They chase off other adults. With subadults and juveniles, they don't, sometimes they'll let them be on the territory. It kind of depends on the time of the year and what's going on in the nest, but they would not allow eaglets to nest on their territory. The eaglets will usually come back to the same area. They're philopatric, so they come back to the same nesting area, but they don't come back and nest in the same nest usually. I can think of one exception to that.
Great. We have another question from YouTube from James Hevelo, who would like to know, do eagles fight each other?
Yes, absolutely they do. And you see interesting kinds of interactions in eagles. So we used to think, I don't know if you've heard of the whirling nuptial flight of an eagle where they lock talons. We used to think that that was only done between mated pairs. Then we went to thinking it was done between mated pairs and also an act of aggression. So it can be either one. And sometimes, as you drive down, say, the Mississippi River, you'll see eagles doing that, and they're not a mated pair, but they appear to be playing, not interacting aggressively. So they have kind of all of these interesting behaviors that they can convert as needed, adaptability, right? But eagles do whirl, they do interact aggressively, they can also act in friendly ways, but on their territories, they hold the line.
Oh, cool. I feel like I remember seeing that in like a National Geographic show when I was like, 7 or 8 years old.
It's really something to see, and you can find it on YouTube if you go looking for it.
Wow, everyone knows where they're going later.
Nice.
So we have another question from YouTube, Ashley Robbins. She'd like to know, how much does an eagle eat?
I want to say it eats 11 to 15% of its body weight every day on average. I could also say they eat a buttload. No, it's more seriously. They really eat a lot, and they eat a lot of different kinds of food. So they're real generalists. They prefer fish, or bald eagles, I should say, prefer fish. But we've seen them bring muskrats, opossums, pheasants, deer parts, turtles. We've seen them eat mice. So while they have food preferences, they're real food preferences for anything they can get.
Sure, that makes sense. That's me too,
Right.
Anything I can get. Sounds great. We have another question from YouTube from Christy Pooley, who would like to know, is it common for parents to leave their juvenile on the nest that won't leave?
We've never seen that happen, so I can't answer that question very easily. In every circumstance, you will see parents leave them alone more, right? But we've never seen parents completely abandon a juvenile or a juvenile fail to fledge. Sometimes it takes a long while, and you're like, oh my God, would you please leave? You're making me nervous. But sooner or later, they always leave.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, what happens if it doesn't?
Yeah, I've never seen or heard of that.
Oh, okay. Good. You don't have like an eagle living in the nest until it's like, 40 in its parents' basement or anything.
No, that doesn't happen.
Okay, good. We have another question from YouTube. Tina would like to know, what's the expected lifespan of an eagle in the wild?
I believe the oldest known eagle was 39 years old when it was hit by a car and killed. That was probably an outlier, but you have to remember, like, as much as we watch these, there's still a lot we don't know about them. So 40 is the oldest. We're not really sure how long an average eagle lives. If 40 is an outlier, maybe 25, 30 years old.
So so you've mentioned this a few times. How does an eagle get hit by a car? Like, how does that happen? Because eagles are so large. You would think that you'd see them, or is it just that it's so fast? Like, how does that occur?
I've seen dangerous situations. There'll be some roadkill that's at the base of a small hill in the road, and somebody will just come whipping over the hill, right? And eagles are really large. They can't get out of the way quickly. And a lot of times they don't want to abandon prey. Usually that's a good characteristic, but sometimes it's not. So, and again, a lot of times I'll encourage people to move it. Actually, last year we were out working on the north nest, and a skunk was in the road. And it was right by a hill. It was absolutely an eagle kill situation, and there were 3 eagles feeding on it. So I chased them away, and I didn't have a shovel. So my partner in the car got to laugh hysterically while I kicked the skunk off the road with my foot. I should have felt so bad. Oh my God.
I don't get to do that in my job, so I mean, I think that's pretty cool. We have a question from Cindy Baramo, who would like to know, do all eagles migrate?
No, eagles are partial migrators. So in fact, last year it was kind of interesting. When Dad was at the Decorah nest until 2018, he and Mom stayed on territory all year round. Last year, DM2's first summer on the territory, he left. Mom stayed, but he left for, oh boy, I think it was a couple of months. So it sort of depends on the situation. If you look at eagles that are way up in the north woods and the ice and snow, I don't know if they all migrate, but they tend to migrate because, northern Canada is a really hard place to live in January and February. Eagles in our latitude may or may not, depending on the circumstances.
Yeah. And we have one last question from Facebook. Mary Schmidt would like to know, are there any new plans for dealing with the black flies at eagle nests this year?
Hi, Mary. So we did check with the Fish and Wildlife Service to see if we would be able to go up to our nests and treat with a product called Endure. There's some other products that we've looked at, but that did work really well with the kestrels, as everybody might remember last year. So we were told that we would not be allowed to do that. It's something we may pursue further. This year has been a very dry year, so we're hopeful at least that, we'll still see black flies because you do see them pretty much every year. We're hopeful we won't see them last year. If you go back and look at any footage from last year, whether it's the Decorah nest, the North nest, or the Mississippi River footage, the amount of flooding that was going on was absolutely unbelievable, and black flies lay their eggs in cold water, running water, right? So it was perfect conditions for black flies. I am hopeful that that won't happen this year, and this is maybe something that we'll keep pursuing as we learn more and think it through.
And just for folks that may not know, why are black flies a problem for eagles?
So there's a couple things that are going on. First of all, black flies the females take a blood meal to get the protein they need to form their eggs, right? So they get in under the feathers or in bare patches on the eagles, they bite them and they slurp up the blood. And when they hatch explosively. So you don't get one black fly, you get a million black flies, and they're all looking for the same thing, a blood meal. And then they also can carry a pathogen on them. I think it's a protozoa, but I don't remember, that can cause sickness and even death. So it's kind of a two-fisted blow, right? First of all, you have hemorrhaging caused by the bites, and then next you have this protozoa or whatever it is. That's a problem. Oh, and I should add, we are also looking at options for treating the streams. That tends to be a little bit harder, but we've been in contact with a black fly professor from the University of Georgia Clemson. He's probably the world's leading expert on this, and this is also something that we're considering. We would have pursued it, more this year, but with the pandemic, that's upended some of our plans a little bit.
And I have one final question. So we do have some students and we have some classrooms that are watching this right now. So if we have some kids that are interested in doing what you do, What are some suggestions you have for, studying in school, extracurriculars they can participate in? How can they get on this path?
Right. So I would suggest there's a couple different things you can do. You can look at a biology degree. You can look at a degree in wildlife management. That can lead you down a variety of interesting paths, right? And I would maybe, if you really want to get out in the field, I would look at wildlife management or forestry if you want to be outside, right? As opposed to maybe a general biology degree, which can take you to a lot of interesting places. But you want to think about, sort of biology, wildlife management, forestry, those ecology, those kinds of tracks as you move through school. I also recommend looking at options to volunteer. So, I don't know if you're under 18, if you're going to be able to volunteer at a raptor rehabilitation facility, but that's an option. You can look at other options of volunteering and sort of connecting with adults that can help you along this path, and also just giving you a chance to really experience the animals and find out if this is what you want to do. I started climbing. I was invited to join a rappel team in 2003. I started climbing, basically because of that. I have a gym membership. I haven't been to the gym in a while now, but I have a gym membership, and I spend a lot of time sort of practicing what we do right, because it's really important to do it right. So that's another thing you can do. You can start looking at climbing. You can connect with adults who are climbing. Maybe you have a gym in your area, so you have some options for that as well. So those are some things you can do if you're interested in doing what I do.
Awesome. So that's about all the time we have for today. So I want to give a big thank you, Amy. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. This was so much fun.
Oh, good. I'm glad. And I want to thank you to everyone for joining us, for being so engaged in the chat. If you want to learn more about eagles and see some footage from the Decorah Eagle Cam, you can turn into Nova tonight at 9, 8 Central. Check out your local listings on your local PBS station to watch Eagle Power, our newest Nova episode, where you'll follow eagles from the nest to the skies to see what makes these predators so remarkable. So if you have any other subjects you're interested in learning more about, let us know in the comments. We'll be hosting more virtual field trips in the future as we continue to do distance and remote learning. Then we'd love to hear from you about what you want to see. So thank you again for joining us. Stay safe and well. Hope to see you soon. Get outside. It's a beautiful day. Maybe you'll spot an eagle. Who knows? So have a good day, and we'll see you soon. Take care. Thanks for joining us.